But the other aspect of it that's important is what's it worth. I don't know very many owners of homes, commercial property, or any type of property really, who say, I care that I own 100% of what I bought, but I really don't care what it's worth. And in fact, it's the what it's worth part of it that points you more directly to planning, because we've all heard the old adage, you know, what it's worth is all about location, 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 location. And what we mean by location is what's going on around us. Whether it's an individual property or a community, the value of property is dependent heavily on what's going on around, what your location is like. And so we need to honor both aspects of private property, both protecting the individual's property rights and ensuring that property owners get the maximum value out of their property based on what's going on around them. And as I've gone up and down this watershed signing up communities for this partnership, I must tell you, there is a distrust of big government. And big government, get the same reaction every time I get to this part of our presentation. Big government, from what I found, is basically any government larger than the group that I'm addressing at the moment. And you know, it's sad, but it's true that there's just a lot of distrust of government. So we have to find a process that recognizes, honors home rule and community independence, that recognizes and honors private property rights, including both the ownership rights and the value of property, and that acknowledges or reflects this distrust of big government anything larger than your own community. In other words, we have to find a mechanism through which we can earn your trust, earn everybody's trust. So we looked at the balanced growth process that the state has come up with, and really felt it was an appropriate process for meeting both the needs and honoring all these constraints. It is an all carrot, no stick approach. At the end of the process, you have a plan, but the plan is a series of recommendations. And all the partners agree to use their best efforts to implement those recommendations. We all acknowledge from day one that in the end, if any particular community chooses not to implement, that they're free to do so, that there will be no penalties exacted, there's no lawsuits to force you to comply with the recommendation. In the end, you know, everything is just that, is a recommendation. And in fact, if you look at the section from the Chagrin plan that I passed out in the Village of Case Mills, you look at the language on the back. Basically, when you get to the end of the planning process, you have an initial section that talks about the watershed as a whole. Then you have a community by community section, which is essentially 2 pages. 1 page is a map of the community, which shows what are called priority conservation areas. On this map, it's dark green. These are the areas within the community has chosen to protect because it has natural values or agricultural values, historic values, recreational values. And then there are other areas called planned development areas, PDAs, which are the areas where you want to concentrate development. It's not the areas where you want to place development exclusively, because under this planning mechanism on this map, all the white areas can still take development. But you want to make a particular effort in the yellow areas, because when you concentrate development, again, it comes back to financial reasons largely, infrastructure becomes cheaper. The infrastructure within the development becomes cheaper. The infrastructure between developments, such as transportation infrastructure, becomes cheaper as well. So there's a map, and then there's a section on the back that usually has one part that talks about how you got to the map, how the community got to the map. You'll notice on this particular one it says, these maps were revised by village staff, mayor, and planning commission prior to endorsement by council in February 2009. While the community of communities in this partnership developed general criteria for these maps, the maps themselves are developed on a community by community basis consistent with those criteria. And then there's a section on implementation, which, as you see, the wording of it is always a recommendation. In this case, it says, in the event that any parcels designated as PCAs are developed, they should consider using Gates Mills Conservation Development District Code. In addition, the village may consider improved codes for stormwater management, floodplain codes with higher standards, or stream and wetland setbacks. So this is the language that we use in balanced growth planning. There's nothing mandatory, but we do make recommendations as to what we think or what the community thinks that particular area should do. There are some carrots at the end. There are a variety of state incentives which are kind of works in process. But one that comes immediately in mind, because I saw there was an agenda item having to do with grants. I don't know if one of your grants was a Clean Ohio grant for trail acquisition, but the Clean Ohio grant program will be modified so that for communities that have done a plan and have a project that's consistent with the plan, they would get extra points in the application process for a Clean Ohio grant. So that's an example of the kind of incentives that the state's going to hold out there at the end of the project. It is a consensus-based approach. In order to get an approved plan, you need to have 75% of all the participating communities, and that's 75% by number of communities, by population, and by land. That sets up some very interesting voting patterns. With 25 communities that are within the watershed right now, you need 19 to pass it. That means any 7 communities, if for whatever reason any 7 communities that saw a common interest and were not happy with the direction this thing was going, they could in effect veto the plan. On the other hand, any communities that aggregated 25% by population could do the same thing. In fact, Columbus already has more than 25% of the population. They can't force anything into the plan, but they can block things if they're not happy. On the other hand, there's probably maybe 4 communities within the watershed that have small population but relatively large land holdings, typically rural. Things weren't going the way they wanted to go. They could also block it. So in the end, this process and this voting mechanism essentially means you've got to achieve consensus. And the only way that you achieve consensus is really if everyone gets what they want. It sounds very difficult, but they've done this process in 4 watersheds up in northern Ohio, and they've succeeded in getting a plan with 75% by population, jurisdiction, and land in all of them. That's one reason we like this process, because it sounds difficult, but the consensus-based approach that you use from the outset actually produces a pretty good result. It's a result that everyone can live with, basically. And then finally, as I mentioned, it is not a plan that dictates things in detail to the member communities. That's what's necessary to honor some of the things I talked about before, the community independence and the and respect for property rights and so forth. What you see here in this Village of Gates Mills section of the plan is representative of what you would end up with in a watershed planning process. Let me just say, kind of, in my presentation, the logistics of what's happening right now. Thus far, the 25 communities that I mentioned, 22 have voted to join. And so we have 3 left that we're waiting for final decisions on. We had previously asked for decisions by a particular deadline in some communities. I think 2 or 3 communities had initially voted no. But we had enough communities say yes to get the grant. And I went to the Ohio Water Resources Council and asked if we could offer everyone one more opportunity to come in. Because in some instances we felt they may not have understood what the process was all about. Which is why I'm here tonight, because they said, yes, you can give everyone another opportunity to come into the partnership. There are also 2 communities that have less than 25%, but asked to join in any event. One was Marion, and the other was Cardington Township. So they're going to be participating as well, although in the land population that they'll be voting will be less than 25% of their total community. We had scheduled an initial meeting for February 10th up in Delaware. We discovered that conflicted with another meeting we're holding about ERA funding, which some participants wanted to participate in. So we've decided to basically hold the same meeting twice. We're going to have an initial meeting on February 10th and another initial meeting that goes over the same material on February 17th. We won't have any votes at either of those 2 meetings, so it's okay if not everyone comes to both meetings. And we would expect the voting to begin in March when we'll finalize procedures and begin establishing the criteria for designating